The attorney's office smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee, and I remember thinking that was a strange place to have your life rearranged. I'd been sitting across from my brother's estate lawyer for maybe 10 minutes when he slid a document across the desk and said quietly, "Mr. Holt, there's a problem with the amended will." I didn't understand what he meant at first. My brother Calvin had died 6 weeks earlier. Pancreatic cancer, same as our father, same ruthless timeline. 11 weeks from diagnosis to burial. I'd driven up to Portland every weekend those last 2 months, sat with him in that house he'd built with his own hands out near Beaverton, and watched him get smaller. Calvin never married, never had kids. Spent 40 years building a small chain of hardware stores from one location on Burnside Avenue into something that actually meant something in the Pacific Northwest. When he died, he left it all to me. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. We'd talked about it every visit, right up until the last one. The amended will said otherwise. According to the document dated 3 weeks before Calvin's death, the majority of his estate, the business, the property, the accounts totaling just over $2 million, was to be transferred into a family trust managed jointly by me and my son-in-law Derek. I sat there looking at that paper for a long time. "I never signed this," I said. The lawyer, a careful man named Mr. Aldrich who'd handled Calvin's affairs for 15 years, nodded slowly. "That's what I was afraid of. Let me back up. My name is Frank Holt. I'm 66 years old. I spent 32 years teaching high school history in Medford, Oregon, and another 4 years before that in the Army. I am not a complicated man. I own a house I've paid off. I drive a truck that's 9 years old. And since my wife Dorothy passed away from a stroke 3 years ago, I have lived quietly and tried not to be a burden to anyone. My daughter Leanne is the best thing I ever had a hand in making. She got her mother's patients and her Uncle Calvin's head for numbers. She works as a hospital administrator in Portland. Smart, careful, kind. We talk twice a week. After Dorothy died, she was the one who drove down and stayed with me for 2 weeks without being asked, and when she finally left, she'd reorganized my entire kitchen and restocked my freezer, and made me promise to call her if I felt the darkness coming. Derek was the thing that came with her. They met in college. He's got the kind of face that looks trustworthy. Square jaw, easy smile, good at making eye contact. He'd been in commercial real estate for years, always on the edge of something big, always one deal away from the breakthrough. Leanne believed in him the way young wives believe in young husbands. Dorothy never said anything directly, but she had a tell. She'd get very quiet around Derek, very still, the way she did when she was being polite instead of genuine. I noticed. I never said anything either. After Calvin died and word got out about the size of the estate, Derek started calling me more. That was the tell I should have caught sooner. He called to check in. He called to talk about the estate process, how these things worked, how probate could take forever if you weren't careful. He'd done some reading, he said. He had some ideas. He knew a guy who specialized in business transitions, could help make sure the hardware stores didn't lose value during the transfer period. I listened. I said thank you. I didn't say yes to anything. 2 weeks after the funeral, Leanne and Derek drove down from Portland to spend the weekend. I cooked a pot roast because that's what Dorothy always made when people came, and we sat at the kitchen table the way families do. And for a few hours it felt like grief was just something that happened to other people. Then after dinner, while Leanne was in the back room on a work call, Derek spread some papers on the table and started talking. "Frank, I want to be straight with you. I've been doing the numbers on Calvin's stores. The market out there is rough for independent hardware right now. Home Depot moved 2 locations in the last 18 months. Without active management, real management, those stores are going to lose 30% of their value in the next 2 years. Maybe more." I looked at the papers. They had charts. They looked professional. "Derek," I said, "I'm not looking to be managed. I'm not talking about managing you. I'm talking about protecting what Calvin built. You're 66. You've got a pension. You've got your house. You don't need to be running 3 hardware stores. But if you let them just sit there while probate drags on, you're watching money disappear." "I have a lawyer," I said. His smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "Mr. Aldrich is great for documents. He's not an operator. Calvin's stores need someone at the wheel. I can do that. I've been in commercial property for 12 years. I know how to read a business like this. I'll think about it." I said, which was my way of ending a conversation I didn't want to be in. He nodded, gathered his papers, and that was that. Or I thought it was. That was a Saturday. The following Thursday, Mr. Aldrich called me. He'd been reviewing the estate file as part of the standard process, he said, cross-checking signatures on Calvin's documents against the originals on file. There was an amended will. He hadn't drafted it. He hadn't been present for its signing. The notary stamp was from an office in Beaverton. The signature on the document looked like Calvin's, but something was off about the date. Calvin had been on heavy pain medication by that point, barely coherent, and yet the handwriting on the amendment was steady. Mr. Aldrich was careful with his words. He said he wasn't making accusations. He said he just thought I should know before we proceeded. I drove up to Portland the next morning. Sitting in that office, looking at the amended will, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 22 years old, and standing at the edge of something that was about to go very wrong. A kind of stillness, not calm. The opposite of calm, actually. A complete absence of panic that comes right before you understand the size of what's happening. What does this amendment do, exactly? I asked. Mr. Aldrich walked me through it. The stores, the main property, and roughly $1.8 million in accounts would go into a joint family trust. I would be listed as a trustee, but all operational decisions required both trustees to sign. The co-trustee named in the document was Derek. The trust language is written so that either trustee can dissolve it after 18 months, Mr. Aldrich said. If one trustee becomes incapacitated or voluntarily withdraws, the remaining trustee assumes full control. I let that sit for a moment. So if I get sick, I said, or if I sign something that removes me from the trust, Derek would have complete control over the full estate. I drove home in silence. I didn't call Leanne. I wasn't ready to. I needed to think, and I needed to understand what I was actually looking at before I said a word to my daughter about her husband. I called a retired friend of mine named Al, who'd been a county DA for 20 years before he moved to Ashland to grow tomatoes. Al listened to everything I said without interrupting, which was one of his best qualities. "Frank," he said when I finished, "you need to call a handwriting expert before you do anything else. And don't touch anything in that will file. Don't sign a single piece of paper until you know what you're dealing with." "You think it's forged?" "I think a man who was on a morphine drip shouldn't have been signing amendments to his estate documents 3 weeks before he died. But that's a question for someone who does this for a living." He gave me a name. Her name was Patricia Osei, and she worked for a forensic documents firm in Eugene. She'd testified in court cases across 4 states. Al said if anyone could look at Calvin's signature and tell me whether my brother had actually held that pen, it was her. I called her that afternoon. She agreed to look at the documents. She asked me to have Mr. Aldrich send her copies of Calvin's original will, any other documents Calvin had signed in the last year of his life, and the amendment itself. Then I went home and cooked dinner and sat in the kitchen, where Derek had spread his charts on my table 2 weeks earlier, and I tried to think about my daughter. Leanne was not part of this. I was certain of that, in the way you're certain about some things without being able to explain how. She was too honest, too careful, too much like her mother. Whatever Derek had done, she hadn't known about it. But telling her would mean watching something break in her that might not heal the right way, and I wasn't ready to do that to her until I knew everything. I waited. Patricia Osei came back to me in 11 days. She was direct about it, the way people who deal in facts tend to be. The signature on the amended will did not match the signature pattern of Calvin's other documents from the same period. The pressure, the letter formation, the tremor characteristics. Calvin had a slight tremor from the pain medication, visible in all his late-stage documents. None of it was consistent. The amendment showed no tremor. The notary stamp, when she traced it, came from a mobile notary service that had since dissolved its license. In her professional opinion, the document was a forgery. I read her report 3 times. Then I called Mr. Aldrich. We agreed to involve the authorities quietly. He had relationships at the district attorney's office in Multnomah County and knew who to call without making it front-page news. The last thing I wanted was Leanne reading about this on her phone. The investigation moved slowly, which was appropriate. These things take time when you're building something that has to hold up. The detectives obtained Derek's financial records with a subpoena. What they found was not subtle. He had $260,000 in personal debt, business loans that had gone bad, a line of credit on their house that Leanne didn't know about, a failed development deal in Bend that had fallen apart 18 months ago. He'd been running from it the whole time, smiling that easy smile and making eye contact and talking about protecting Calvin's legacy. They also found the email. It was in a draft folder on an account Derek used for business. He'd written it to the mobile notary, a man named Webb who turned out to have a record for document fraud going back 8 years, laying out exactly what he needed and when. The email was dated 4 days after Calvin's diagnosis. He'd started planning it before my brother even knew how bad it was. I found that out on a Tuesday morning. I went outside and sat in my truck for a long time. Dorothy's voice came to me the way it sometimes does. Quiet, certain. She'd never said anything about Derek directly. She'd gotten still around him. Now I understood why. The detectives wanted to move on a Friday. They asked if I wanted to be present when they spoke to Derek, and I said no. I didn't trust what I might say. They asked if I wanted to notify Leanne before the arrest, and I said yes. She deserved to hear it from me, not from a police call or a news alert on her phone. I drove up to Portland on Thursday evening. Leanne answered the door in her work clothes. She took one look at my face and said, "Dad, what happened?" I sat her down at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd probably had 100 ordinary dinners, with a man who had been stealing from her father since before her uncle's body was in the ground. And I told her everything, all of it. Slowly and completely, the way you tell someone something they can't unhear. She didn't cry right away. She went very still, the way Dorothy used to. She asked me to start over twice. She asked questions I didn't have answers to. She sat with her hands flat on the table and looked at nothing for a long time. Then she said, "How long have you known? A few weeks? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I needed to be sure, and because I didn't want to put this in front of you until I had something real." She nodded slowly. "Where is he right now?" "Upstairs, I assume." I parked down the street. Leanne stood up, went to the window, looked out at the dark yard. "He asked me about your estate 2 months ago. Said he wanted to make sure we had a plan to help you if anything happened. I thought he was being thoughtful." She laughed, but there was nothing behind it. "I told him you were the most capable man I'd ever known and you didn't need a plan." She turned around. Her face was the face of someone crossing from one version of their life into another, and knowing it. "What happens now?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning, the police are going to come. I wanted you to know before they did." She walked over and sat down next to me, and I put my arm around her, and she pressed her face into my shoulder the way she used to, when she was very small and the world felt too big. We sat like that for a while, without saying anything. Sometimes that's all there is to do. Derek was arrested the next morning on charges of forgery, fraud, elder financial abuse, and criminal conspiracy. The last charge stemmed from Webb, who had agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a plea. Webb's account of the arrangement was thorough and damning. He'd met with Derek twice. Derek had provided Calvin's original will for reference, a copy of his signature from another document, and the language for the amendment itself, which a paralegal Derek knew had drafted. The case took 8 months to go to trial. Derek's lawyer tried the story that it had all been a misunderstanding, that Derek had genuinely believed Calvin had wanted to include him in the estate management, had simply tried to formalize what he believed was his brother-in-law's intention. The jury heard that argument for 2 days. They also heard Patricia Ossie explain her findings for half a day, and they saw the email to Webb, and they watched Derek's financial records entered into evidence line by line. They convicted him on all counts. He was sentenced to 6 years. The judge, before he read the sentence, made a statement I've thought about many times since. He said that crimes against the elderly, particularly those that exploit grief, were among the most corrosive things a community could tolerate, because they targeted the moment when people were most vulnerable and most deserved to be left in peace. I sat in that courtroom and I thought about Calvin, who died trusting that the people around his brother were decent. I thought about Dorothy, who had seen something in Derek's eyes I'd missed for 15 years. I thought about Leanne, who was sitting 3 seats down from me and hadn't looked at the defense table once during the entire proceedings. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse with her. She'd filed for divorce the month before. She'd moved into a smaller apartment in the Pearl District that I'd helped her paint on a Saturday in October, and she seemed, cautiously, to be finding something steady under her feet again. On the courthouse steps, we stood in the weak Portland February sun for a moment, without saying anything. "You okay?" I asked. "No," she said. "But I'm going to be." That seemed right to me. That seemed like the honest answer. There was a man who'd been helpful during the investigation. A county court clerk named Stan, who'd flagged an irregularity in the probate filing early on and brought it to Mr. Aldrich's attention before it could become a bigger problem. He'd noticed the notary license number on the amendment didn't match active registrations in the state database. He'd pulled the thread without anyone asking him to, on his own time, because it bothered him. When the estate finally settled, I went to see him. He was surprised I remembered his name. I told him that kind of attention mattered, that it had made a difference I couldn't easily overstate. He shrugged and said it was just part of the job. I asked him if he had kids. He had a daughter, 16, wanted to study environmental science. "Good student," he said, but the in-state tuition numbers were something he thought about a lot. I told him my financial advisor would be contacting him. I was establishing a scholarship fund in Calvin's name for students pursuing degrees in the trades or sciences, and his daughter would be the first recipient if she wanted it. Full tuition, any Oregon State school. Stan looked at me for a long moment without speaking. "Sir, you don't have to do that." "I know," I said. Calvin would have, though. He had a soft spot for people who did their job right for no particular reason other than that it was right. Stan nodded. His eyes were wet. We shook hands. I didn't go back to Medford right away after everything settled. I stayed in Portland for a month, close to Leanne. We had dinners. We watched bad television. We went to the coast one Sunday and walked on the beach at Cannon Beach for 2 hours without talking much, just being in the same air. She asked me once, driving back, whether I thought she should have seen it coming. I told her no. I told her that people who are very good at deceiving people spend years getting that good, and that holding yourself responsible for not seeing through someone else's practiced dishonesty was a way of being cruel to yourself for no useful reason. She was quiet for a while. "Mom saw it," she said. "Your mother saw a lot of things," I said. "She was exceptional. But even she didn't say anything directly. She just got quiet. We can't always name what we know." Leanne nodded. "We drove for a while in the gray light. Calvin left all of that to you because he trusted you," she said eventually. "Not because of what you do with the money, just because he knew you." "I know," I said. "What are you going to do with it?" I thought about that. I'd been thinking about it for months, slowly, the way I tried to think about things that mattered. I was going to keep the stores. Mr. Aldrich had found a good manager, a woman who'd worked for Calvin for 11 years and knew the operation better than anyone, and I was going to let her run them with a partnership stake that would give her something real to work toward. Calvin would have liked that. He always said the hardware business was about people who built things, and you had to take care of the people who built things. I was going to fix the back porch on my house in Medford, which had been soft in 2 boards for 3 years, and which Dorothy had complained about every spring. I was going to take the trip to Ireland that Dorothy and I had planned twice and never taken. Alone this time, which wasn't what either of us had imagined. But I'd gotten to an age where I believed that doing a thing imperfectly was better than not doing it because it couldn't be done right. And I was going to call Leanne every Sunday, not twice a week the way we'd been doing, but every Sunday, the same time, the way families used to do before everyone had phones in their pockets, and the ritual of it got lost. Derek served 4 years of his sentence and was released on parole. Leanne told me when it happened. She said it in the same tone she used to tell me about road closures or weather delays, information she thought I should have, delivered without drama. I haven't seen him. I don't intend to. I think about forgiveness sometimes, the way you think about things you're not sure you're capable of. I don't hate Derek. Hate is expensive, and I'm 66 years old, and I'd rather spend what I have on other things. But I don't think forgiveness is something I owe anyone who planned what he planned in the weeks when my brother was dying. Some things can be set down without being resolved. What I think about more is Calvin. I think about him at that hardware store on Burnside Avenue that he opened when he was 28 years old with $11,000 in a handshake deal on a lease. Think about how he worked 6 days a week for 20 years to make it into something. I think about how he never once complained about the hours, because he loved the work the way some people love their children. Not because it was easy, but because it was his. He deserved better than what happened in those last weeks. He deserved to die in peace, knowing his wishes were intact and the people around his family were trustworthy. I can't give him that. What I can do is make sure that what he built goes on doing what he would have wanted it to do, being useful, employing people, serving a community. That's not nothing. Every few months I drive up to Portland to check on the stores. The manager, a woman named June who has a handshake like a carpenter and an eye for inventory that I genuinely admire, walks me through everything with the patience of someone explaining things to a person she respects anyway. I usually buy something I don't need, a set of drill bits, a new level, because it feels right to leave money at the register. Last October, I was standing in the Burnside store, watching a young couple argue companionably over which type of grout sealer to buy, and I thought about Calvin standing in this same space 30 years ago, just starting, not knowing yet how it would turn out. I thought about Dorothy telling me to call if the darkness came. I thought about Leanne on a beach in the gray light, asking what her mother saw. I bought a level I didn't need and drove home. The back porch is fixed. The boards are solid. Dorothy would have appreciated that more than any of it, I think. Not the money, not the verdict, not even the justice of it. Just the porch finally done, and the house in order, and someone paying attention to the small things that hold everything together. That's what she always said mattered. The small things, tended to. Everything else follows from that.